Welcome to the AM Update, Week in Review. A collection of the best moments from Aaron McIntyre's Morning Update.
White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller at the White House press briefing room last week gave the media a much-needed civics lesson. Apparently, somebody asked him to explain the executive branch and executive powers as if they're 5 years old, so Stephen Miller obliged.
It is true that many of the people in this room for 4 years failed to cover the fact that Joe Biden was mentally incompetent and was not running the country. It is also true that many people in this room who have used this talking point that Elon is not elected fail to understand how government works. So I'm glad for the opportunity for a brief civics lesson. A president is elected by the whole American people. He's the only official in the entire government that is elected by the entire nation, right? Judges are appointed, members of Congress are elected at the district or state level, which is one man. And the Constitution, Article 2, has a clause known as the vesting clause, and it says the executive power shall be vested in a president, singular. The whole will of democracy is imbued into the elected president. That president then appoints staff to then impose that democratic will onto the government. The threat to democracy, indeed the existential threat to democracy, is the unelected bureaucracy of lifetime tenured civil servants who believe they answer to no one, who believe they can do whatever they want without consequence, who believe they can set their own agenda no matter what Americans vote for. So Americans vote for radical FBI reform, and FBI agents say they don't want to change. Or Americans vote for radical reform on our energy policies, but EPA bureaucrats say they don't want to change. Or Americans vote to end DEI, racist DEI policies, and lawyers of the Department of Justice say they don't want to change. What President Trump is doing is he is removing federal bureaucrats who are defying democracy by failing to implement his lawful orders, which are the will of the whole American people.
It's just that simple, folks. There's a nice little civics lesson as if we're 5 years old, which most of the media, I think, most of the mainstream media probably is. It's White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller explaining, in no uncertain terms, what it means when we talk about executive power in our system of government. If there's one word that I would sum up the Trump administration so far, the second Trump administration, it would be this: unapologetic. Unapologetic. You saw multiple examples of this. Just today, Donald Trump himself telling Maine's governor off to her face, protecting women's sports. That's righteous. That's unapologetic. That's awesome. Tom Homan speaking at CPAC, unapologetic for what he's trying to do. Securing the border and deporting bad guys. Unapologetic. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. Yes, the president has the power to fire whoever he wants to within the federal government under his purview as the chief executive of the United States. Stephen Miller, you just heard a few moments ago. Unapologetic. No, spelling out, this is our system of government. If you don't like it, you should have voted differently. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, unapologetic. We're getting played here by Vladimir Zelensky. Unapologetic. It's unison across the board. The way they're dealing with the media, the way they're messaging a clear vision. There's no humana. No, there's no beating around the bush. There's no Attorney General Jeff Sessions responding to Trump, goading him on to doing more things and saying that's kind of hurtful. It's just unapologetic. And then the latest example unfolded over the weekend. Elon Musk has been persona non grata for the entire American left, for basically the entire duration of the second Trump administration thus far, as he leads efforts at DOJ to uncover just rampant abuse of your tax dollars in the federal government. He has been persona non grata. He's been described as the shadow president. They're trying to drive a wedge between Elon Musk and Donald Trump. That's not happening. In fact, over the weekend, Trump and Musk doubled down. Trump said in a post on Truth Social, Elon is doing a great job, but I would like to see him get more aggressive. Remember, we have a country to save, but ultimately to make greater than ever before. MAGA. Elon Musk on X took a screenshot of that post on Truth Social and said, "Will do, Mr. President," just completely and totally unapologetic. I'm not sure about the extent to which this country can recover after what has been done to it, when 12 of the last 16 years of leadership was from Barack Obama and Joe Biden. But I can assure you, the path that we are on, at least from rhetoric and messaging perspective, using the bully pulpit effectively, the path that we're on, if we can actually save this country, the path has to look like what we're on right now. So again, if you're wondering why at this time last year I was a curmudgeon and so antagonistic towards Donald Trump, and why I am one of his biggest cheerleaders now, it's because of what we're saying here. It's because of what we're doing right now. If you cooked up a president, a reasonable president in the year 2025, if you cooked him up in a lab, this administration would not look much different from that idealistic president and administration. So again, I continue to be really, really optimistic. And by the way, Republicans in Congress would do well to follow this administration's example, and they better.
You're listening to the AM Update, Week in Review. Follow on X and Instagram at RealAMUpdate.
And now here's this. If the bones of Jesus were found and proven beyond a shadow of a doubt to be Jesus's bones, would that change your faith at all? That was the question posed by an atheist named Alex O'Connor to Christian apologist William Lane Craig during a recent interview. Now, Alex O'Connor, I never heard of him up until a couple of weeks ago. I've seen a few of his clips, and he seems to not be a frothing at the mouth atheist. He seems to enjoy vigorous debate. He asked this question in earnest of apologist William Lane Craig. Listen up.
If the bones of Jesus were discovered, for instance, to give a famous example, this would be the kind of thing, or I should form it as a question, would this be the kind of thing that would essentially just invalidate all of the religious experience that you may have had in your life, that you say sort of exists in a different evidential plane? But surely upon discovering the bones of Jesus, proving that he never rose from the dead and ascended into heaven, this would give you reason to essentially favor this evidence over the personal experience that you've had with God, such that that personal experience becomes invalidated?
If the bones of Jesus were actually discovered, then the resurrection would be false and you should not believe in it. But I think that given the uncertainty inherent in archaeological discoveries, we're never going to have evidence that the actual bones of Jesus were found. I think the possibility would always be there to say this is probably not actually his tomb. Fortunately, I don't think we find ourselves in that situation, Alex, because I think that the evidence for the historicity of Jesus' resurrection, including the empty tomb, is very strong. And so I don't feel that sort of tension between faith and fact. To me, faith and fact are aligned. But I do realize that for certain people at certain times and places in history, the evidence and the truth can be out of sync with each other. And again, I refer back to my illustration of students in the old Soviet Union who had to persist in faith in spite of the evidence that they had from their professors and teachers. And I think that they were rational to do so.
That is apologist William Lane Craig being interviewed by atheist Alex O'Connor, who was asking, I think, a very earnest question. If the bones of Jesus were discovered, would that impact your faith? And I think William Lane Craig gave an honest answer there, but I really think he missed an opportunity. The answer to that question from an atheist would be this. If undeniable evidence of a miracle performed by Jesus Christ were discovered, something that defied all known laws of physics, would that change your lack of faith? Until such a time as we can find the bones of Jesus, if there were empirical evidence of a miracle performed by Jesus being true, something that defied all known laws of physics beyond just the evidence that we find in scriptures. Empirical evidence, evidence that you can see and feel and touch. Would that change your lack of faith? That completely flips the premise of the question. Your reliance on empirical evidence cuts both ways. I think William Lane Craig, one of my favorite apologists, kind of missed an opportunity there. This week, Apple announced its largest ever spend commitment, with plans to spend and invest more than $500 billion in the U.S. over the next 4 years. Apple said in a statement, quote, "This new pledge builds on Apple's long history of investing in American innovation and advanced high-skilled manufacturing, and will support a wide range of initiatives that focus on artificial intelligence, silicon engineering, and skills development for students and workers across the country." That last part there is really good, and I hope they're serious about it. I want to tell you, though, I think Apple has done the impossible now. And I want to tell you why. Let's just look at where they are as a company. Every single update to their iPhones, it brings about planned obsolescence for older models, even if they're a year old. Not that I have any experience with that. Every update brings about just tinkering for the sake of tinkering with things that already worked. Apple got up one morning and was like, you know what needs to be fixed? The Photos app. Let's make it not even recognizable anymore. Okay, the thing that just worked really well before and was really simple and easy, let's make that really confusing and hard to understand for all of our tens of millions of users. And yes, Apple, sure, they just acquiesced to the United Kingdom to provide user data from British citizens to their government. Whatever. And yeah, they just changed the way podcasts are distributed last year. If you take a break from a podcast for 5 days, you no longer get that podcast in your feed. So most of you probably don't care about that, but I do. Tim Cook, Apple CEO, posted this yesterday. It was a picture of Steve Jobs. Steve saw the world not just as it was, but as it could be. His vision continues to inspire us to push boundaries and create the future. Today, on his 70th birthday, we honor his legacy and enduring impact. His vision continues. His vision. That reminds me, Apple's Vision Pro was a thing for like 2 days last year. And I haven't heard anything about it since. So what am I talking about? Apple has done the impossible. They are a stagnant company. A stagnant company. They're just tinkering with stuff, software, just for the sake of tinkering. I got an Apple computer when I was 17 before I left for college. It was just the baseline MacBook. And the thing I loved the most about it is it just worked. So intuitive, so easy to use. Same thing when I got an iPod Touch. So intuitive, so easy to use. But Apple is no longer innovating in a mass production sense, in a way that is affordable to more than just the uber rich. See that as the Vision Pro customers. They are no longer innovating in a way that benefits the everyman. The only innovation they seem to think that they're doing is just tinkering with stuff that doesn't need to be tinkered with. Software. Their only true innovation over the past decade and a half. Their only true innovation is the impossible. They, with a $3 trillion market cap, have innovated a way to circle the drain as a company with a $3 trillion market cap. How is that possible? It's not. But yet Apple seems to be doing it. So I'm happy about their $500 billion investment. That's basically nothing. They should do much more in the United States. This should be one of the world's foremost innovative companies, but they have grown stagnant. They have grown, at least started to go into the realm of companies without a vision. That happens to every company without a vision. trying to extract every last nickel out of their subscriber base, their user base. So that is what I mean when Apple has done the impossible. It should not be possible to circle the drain when you have a $3 trillion market cap. You should be sending people to freaking Mars with that. All right. Am I just being a millennial curmudgeon here? I especially want to know amongst millennials listening, my own generation, because we grew up and it really, at least from my estimation, Apple products really were kind of magical. They were really cool and really easy to use, and they always just worked. Now, I don't think so. Not as much. I asked you, poll of the week, is Apple circling the drain as a company despite its massive advantages? I gave you 4 options. Other is in last place. I'll get to those responses in just a little bit. In third place is no, they haven't lost their way. You're being too hard on them at 16%. At second place is, well, it's a mixed bag. 39% of you voted for that. And at 42%, and in first place, yes, Apple has lost their soul. Let's go to your responses. Here's Alex first. He voted for mixed bag. My uncle worked for an Apple as a mechanical engineer in China for over a decade. He, along with many others, quit when Tim Cook took over. No one liked him, and employees said he did not share the vision that Steve Jobs had for Apple. I blame Cook for Apple's stagnation and crappy photo album layout. I still have Apple everything, but my enthusiasm for the company has been diminishing. That's almost, especially the latter part of that. I can't say that I have an uncle who worked for a mechanical engineer for Apple, but the latter part of that is basically where I am. I just encourage my parents to get a Mac Mini because it's still probably the easiest computer to use, and they still, by and large, work pretty well. But overall, it's just on the decline. It's kind of weird. It's subtle, and you can't put a finger on it necessarily. But yeah, it just, something is not right. It's lost the magic is the best way that I can describe it. Because especially as a millennial, going from, oh my goodness, these iPods, they can hold, 100 songs or whatever it was with the original iPods. And you saw all the cool kids. Well, not all the cool kids. I grew up in southern Iowa, so there was maybe 1 or 2 kids in school that had an iPod that I would see even as a homeschool. I didn't get to see it that often because I wasn't in the public school that often for various functions. And man, that is really cool. That little thing without a spinning disc or anything like that, it can hold 100 songs. That's incredible. And then going from that to the color iPod, that's even cooler. And they got even smaller. And then the video iPod, they were just incredible devices. And then the iPod Touch, and it was just an amazing time to be alive. And maybe that's my problem a little bit, is that I'm so used to these great leaps in consumer innovation, not just these really, really specific niche applications for a very niche market like the Apple Vision Pro, which is only available for really, really high prices. So only a few people are going to be able to afford those. That is innovative, but it's not really available for the masses. I think maybe that's the problem that I view Apple nowadays as, but it does seem like there was a definitive shift when Tim Cook took over. Justin Plaster said, it's a long, slow death from what they once were. They've lost sight of their core values when they had the hip, cool things that just work better than other products. Most concerning is their acquiescence to government privacy invasions. Maybe their announcement of U.S. investment can make an impact. Their stuff should be made here anyway. That's kind of what I'm thinking as well. And I remember back during the San Bernardino terror attack, Apple came out and said, no, we're not going to unlock the terrorists' phones. We're not going to do that. And I thought, you know what, at least they're being consistent. Well, we've gone from that, and just a few years later, well, it's more than a few years later, but not very much longer later, Apple's just saying, yeah, UK government, you can have all the user data that you would like. Mrs. Dizzy Funt says, been an Apple user since I bought myself a Mac in 1995 and using it to make money since 2000, graphic design, TV production, etc. Still won't switch to PC for work, but I am truly disgusted by what the company is doing to themselves. So I'm ambidextrous. I grew up using a PC. My first personal computer was a Mac. I use really the equal amount of time during my day job. I use both Mac and PC. At home for this project, I use a Mac, and that's probably what I would prefer to use for the foreseeable future. But yeah, I'm not as partial to Mac as I once was. Arthur Grimm will end with this one. Steve Jobs would return from the grave and start firing. Apple has long ago lost innovation. Now it's a service company that recycles yesterday's products and copies features from its competitors while claiming it's all new. It's Jeb Bush's Please Clap, a former Apple employee. So Arthur, you used to work for Apple, so obviously you had an affinity for the products, but you too have become disillusioned. It's really sad. It really is sad. Because as I stated, and I'll restate one more time before we close out today, when you have a company with all of the advantages that Apple still enjoys, it should be a pride of a country. It should be the pride of a country, particularly a tech company like Apple. But it seems like it's fast becoming anything but.
You're listening to the AM Update, Week in Review. Follow on X and Instagram at RealAMUpdate.
A bankruptcy filing could potentially be on the menu for Hooters of America in the near future. The company is looking at possibly filing for bankruptcy as a means of restructuring the restaurant chain and tackling its debt. That was first reported by Bloomberg late last week. My wife told me about this story. I'd seen a headline, but I really didn't care until I started thinking about it a little bit more. I don't really understand the point of Hooters, the restaurant. Okay. I understand the point of Hooters, okay, or the points, if you will, badoom-ching. But that's not what I'm really talking about here. I don't understand this. If you look at this objectively, now I'm a Christian. I don't believe that you should be patronizing a restaurant that's main attraction is the ability to ogle women who are wearing outfits that leave very little up to the imagination. Those women, of course, are not your wife, whether you're married or not. So that's what I believe. We need to establish something as well. You don't go to Hooters for the food, okay? You're not going to Hooters for the food. Can we establish that? All agree to that? You're not going there for the shrimp tartare. You're not going there for the steak de Burgo. You're not going there for the amazing endless breadsticks. You're going there for one purpose, and I just stated what that is. But anyway, back to the business plan of Hooters. The founders got together and they thought, you know what? There's a ripe market targeting men for a restaurant. And these men are just so filled with lust that they want to go ogle women who are leaving very little up to the imagination, but not filled with lust to the point that they want to go all the way to a strip club. There's also these very same men. They are also lazy enough to not want to actually find one of these women and marry them, or take care of their own wives if they're married. But they're not so lazy that they don't want to just stay home and pleasure themselves by themselves. We really think that there's a market for this. Am I getting this right? It's odd, is it not? Thinking about this even more, is it just a case that our vices just make us really stupid? And believe me, we all have our vices. So don't take this as anything short of just, I'm asking questions here. It's just the oddest thing. Filled with lust to the point that you want to go ogle women who are not your wife, but not so filled with lust that you don't want to just go through the whole shebang and go to a strip club. Lazy enough to not want to go out and find a wife, but not so lazy that you just want to stay home and pleasure yourself to pornography. Am I getting something wrong here? I mean, are the people who go to Hooters, are the men who go to Hooters like Michael Scott in that episode of The Office where he breaks up, or his girlfriend breaks up with him, and he keeps playing the sample of the song on iTunes over and over again?
Why don't you just buy the whole song?
I don't have to buy it. I just want to taste it.
I mean, I have to think that's kind of the equivalent of guys that go to Hooters. They just want a taste of the real deal. It's just odd, don't you think? I'm a red-blooded American male. I'm attracted to my wife, so much so that we've had multiple children together. But just looking at this objectively, just outside of a moral framework whatsoever, Hooters is just weird. Anyway, I know I'm inevitably going to get many, many comments from people saying, there are probably more important things you could be talking about, Aaron. Yeah, probably. But this has been stuck in my craw for the last several days. I wanted to talk about it. See you again tomorrow.
This has been the AM Update Week in Review. The AM Update will be back on Monday and every weekday at 4 a.m. Eastern Time.